Hello. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Jon, and I'm going to be coordinating Alpha at our church this year. For those of you who have heard of Alpha, raise your hand. Okay, fair amount. And by show of hands, who has attended Alpha before? Okay. Yeah, so the Alpha course originates back in London, England in the 1970s. And our church, CFA, has been running it annually for roughly the last 2 decades. Alpha is all about creating an environment where people can explore, learn about the Christian faith, while talking through their questions, qualms, hang-ups, curiosities about the Bible, or God, or Jesus, Christians, religion. Now, here at CFA, one of our greatest hopes is to create a culture of invitation. What this means, it's a culture where it's normal for each of us in the sanctuary to actively invite our friends, family, coworkers, classmates, acquaintances to experience the goodness of God and relationship with Jesus Christ. Now, we discovered an Alpha resource called Life Shared, which is designed for this exact purpose, to inspire the church into a culture of invitation. And we're actually going to be using this over the next 3 Sunday services starting today. So, here's what to expect. In a couple of moments, we're going to be watching a 15-minute video. Now, on 2 occasions, this video is going to be paused, and there's going to be a question displayed on the screen. During these times, you're going to turn to the people in the pew beside you, behind you, and/or in front of you, and form somewhat of a breakout group to discuss the question on the screen. Some of you are going to be pumped about this opportunity. Some of you are going to be terrified to talk to complete strangers. And that's okay. So I guess while we strongly encourage that you engage in conversation, know that you can opt to just sit and listen to what people are saying around you. After the video, Steve will come up and he will preach on what we've been watching and talking about. So, I'd love to say a quick prayer, and then we can get going. Lord, as we watch this video, chat with those around us, and take in Steve's preaching, I pray that you would give us eyes to see and ears to hear the message that you have for us today. Fill us with your love for the people in our day-to-day lives, and place within us a deep desire to see people enter into relationship with you. Amen. Enjoy.
I've been following Jesus now for more than 15 years. And even after all of these years, I'm still struck by the way someone's life can be totally changed when God enters their story. And I bet you've seen this too. Like there's nothing quite like watching somebody go from hopelessness to being full of hope, or when someone's weighed down by shame or fear, and then they experience freedom and courage. And even as I'm talking about this right now, I find myself longing to see this happen around me more often. Another thing that strikes me after this many years of following Jesus is how hard I can sometimes find it to share my faith with others. I can still find it intimidating or awkward to talk to my friends about Jesus. And I know I'm not the only one who feels this way. And so in this series, we want to spend the next 3 sessions talking about it. We want to look at how we can all play a part in seeing lives transformed around us. We're going to look at themes like invitation and hospitality and prayer, and what it could mean for us to share our lives and our faith with others. In each episode, we'll hear a few of our friends unpacking some of these ideas, and we'll also hear stories of people that have shared their faith with their friends at Alpha. If you're unfamiliar with Alpha, it's a course where you can invite your friends to explore the Christian faith over a meal. And throughout this journey, you'll have a chance to talk together about how these ideas and stories might affect the way you think about sharing your faith. So, to start things off, take a few minutes right now to talk with your group about what feelings or thoughts come up for you around this idea of sharing your faith.
All right, here we go. We're getting started. So, again, it is forming somewhat of a breakout group with the people around you. There's no limit to how few or many people, except for one is probably too few. So try and just turn to people around you, form a bit of a group or a pair of whatever that is, and we just want to make sure we're starting to have some conversations. So go for it. All right. Awesome. So I guess I didn't tell you how long we were talking for, so could have just left you for a couple of hours. No, it's about 5 minutes that we stopped to talk. And so we're just going to jump back into the video right now.
I think in general, people feel pretty overwhelmed with the idea of evangelism. I think a lot of people feel like in order to share their faith, they need a master's degree in ethics and a master's degree in apologetics. So just telling people, go out there and share your faith, in some sense can be very, very overwhelming. The fears are of not having the information they need, not having answers to the larger questions, not being able to convey those in such a short period of time, feeling the pressure to get it right, outcome anxiety. Sometimes we make sharing God's love and evangelism too complicated. There's 3 phrases in the New Testament that talk about Jesus' mission. The first phrase says, the Son of Man came to seek and save the lost. Then it says, the Son of Man came to give his life as a ransom for many. So this is the purpose of God. He came to seek and save. He came as the Savior from our sin. The third time that phrase is used, the Son of Man came, is actually about the methodology or the way that he did it. It said, the Son of Man came eating and drinking. And that was his methodology. His mission was to serve. His mission was to save. The way he did it was by eating and drinking. So to me, hospitality and reclaiming this vision of hospitality is the way that we take steps towards engaging people in the world. Almost every time you see Jesus in the gospel, he is eating, going to someone's house, leaving someone's house, on his way to someone's house, or with another meal. In fact, if you were to say, take Luke's gospel, it just moves from hospitality moment to hospitality moment to hospitality moment, ultimately culminating with Jesus around the table, talking about his death, and then after his resurrection, he's with his disciples again, breaking bread and talking. And it seems that when you get around a table, you get around a meal, it just creates this space for the ministry of Jesus to happen in the lives of others. So to me, I think one of the central ways and the easiest ways is moving towards hospitality, opening up our hearts and lives and inviting other people in. You know, one of the challenges of living in our modern life, our lives are so fast. They can just be a blur. We move so quickly that we can often it's not that God's not working, we're just not aware of what's actually happening. And when you look at the ministry of Jesus, one of the things that's always stood out to me is Jesus' ability just to see people. Jesus saw people everybody else overlooked. He saw blind people, he saw sinners, he saw those who needed healing. And often the disciples would just rush past them like they were irrelevant so they could get on to bigger things. But Jesus just noticed the individual. So in many ways, we need to just reclaim the art of paying attention to what God's doing around us. And sometimes it's not very dramatic. There's no pillar of fire, there's no cloud. It's just a prompting or a response, or listening to a tone in somebody's voice, or hearing a strain in something they're communicating, or details they continually bring up about areas of concern. And those little moments can often be invitations or windows into what's happening behind the scenes. And that's often the Holy Spirit highlighting his work so that we can respond and step into that and see God's love move into that person's life. So I was thinking about this as a pastor in New York. One day I got into a taxi and we were driving past a restaurant that was one of my favorite restaurants, and it was always popular. There was a line out the door. And I'd struck up a conversation with the taxi driver, and he was an immigrant like I was. And there was a lot of controversy at the time about immigrants and people moving with this nation. There was a lot of fear of the other. Who were these people coming in? Would they disrupt our way of life? A lot of political commentary like that. But as we began to talk, all of those stereotypes fell away, and we just found ourselves being fathers, both from different places, trying to make our way into this country. And as we moved past this particular restaurant with a line out the door, I said to him, "Hey, have you ever eaten there? Have you tried that food?" And he said to me, "No, I always see the lines there. I've always wondered if it's good." So I said to him, "Hey, if you leave the meter running in the taxi and I run in and grab some of that food, do you want to just sit here and keep talking?" And he said, "Would you really do that?" And I said, "Yeah, I'd love to do it." So I ran in and I got him some of this food, and it was actually this almost like a transcendent moment. It was two men from other sides of the world sitting in a taxi, sharing food. And all of the stereotypes about who he was and what he represented just melted away. And we had in the middle of New York this little portal of belonging that broke in the midst of all of the stereotypes, all of the suspicion, just opening our hearts, sharing our stories. And it was the highlight of my day. And as we got out of the taxi, I realized that's exactly what had happened. This environment of welcome shifted our understanding of each other, and this community of belonging was formed, even for a moment in a taxi on the side of the street in the middle of New York. And I couldn't help but wonder what would happen in our lives if we just paid attention to those little promptings and these environments of welcome, these little portals of hospitality broke out. And if that became a normal practice for followers of Jesus in coffee shops, in workplaces, on sports fields, soccer moms, everybody, there would just be this deconstruction of fear, and there would be an inbreaking of love and welcome. And that may be what we're called to do as followers of Jesus in our time.
So, 5 more minutes to turn to those people. And if you find that after 4 minutes, it's like, well, I feel like we've covered this pretty well, ask each other about how your week was and get to know each other a little bit. So we'll give you 5 minutes and go ahead and dive in to this question.
growing up,
So that means we're going back to the video. Okay.
I was in a very atheist household. It was my mother, my brother, and I. They didn't go to church. They didn't follow any religion of any sort. When I was 19, I was coming out of a really awful relationship that had lasted the good majority of 3 years. It was really hard on me, mentally, emotionally, physically, just very dark and negative and toxic. I remember one day just being in the room alone, quiet and sad, and it felt like something was in the room with me, if you want to explain it that way. I just felt something caring for me. And I asked the question, is this God? Is this, Jesus trying to get through to me? So I was left with a lot of questions.
I would say there were quite a few curious people there, either people that had grown up in a Christian background or had known people. I wondered what it would look like just to host an alpha for my friends and particularly my coworkers. I was definitely pretty nervous just because obviously it's really easy to make a name for yourself at your workplace because you're there all the time, whether it's oh, you could be the really fun one, or it's very easily you could be oh, that Christian that always asks people to go to church. And I didn't want her to think that our friendship was just so I can invite her to church.
So Ashton and I were working a shift together. We were walking past each other and she stopped me from where I was going and just said it very directly, casually, I want you to come to an alpha. What day is gonna work for you? What day is consistent for you? And I was immediately drawn and ready to participate in it.
There's not really a super easy way to do it. There's no, if you're ever waiting for the right time, there's times that are better than others, but there's not a time that it really you're this is the moment.
So I showed up at Alpha for the first time. It was very welcoming, very casual. Lots of people that I knew were there, all my age. So, you walk in, people were hugging, people were saying hello, people were catching up, there was food there. So it just felt like you were going to hang out with your friends. A lot of people had questions just like I did. They were either atheist, Christian, nothing, they just had the same questions as me. So I felt very comfortable knowing that I wasn't the only one who was exploring it.
Maybe halfway, maybe 3/4, we were just talking and it was discussion time. She's yeah, well, now that I'm Christian, and I was what? And I was and I was kind of look at other people that I know, and I looked at them, they looked at me, and I was
things just started to make sense for me. Things started clicking. My past, there were certain connecting dots that I was oh, that makes so much sense. And then, yeah, I think I just told you one day.
yeah.
It wasn't a huge big bang or I saw the light or anything. It was just, I woke up, I'm this is who I am.
Yeah, I firmly believe obviously it wasn't me that brought you to Christ and gave you this life. It was I was just being faithful to God's call, and that looked like inviting you, and then he did the rest, and he obviously does so much for your life. And
I think you just kind of helped me see a little clearer, or help me move a little bit closer.
Yeah. God pulled through.
Whenever I'm part of a conversation like this, a conversation about sharing my faith or evangelization, I find that there are a few different emotions at play inside of me at the same time. There's this part of me that's really excited, excited about going forward with new intentionality in this area. There's a part of me that feels thankful hearing how God has impacted people's lives. And I can also experience feelings of guilt about not doing enough in the past, or even some fear or uncertainty about what this could look like going forward. And I bet you can relate to this. And for me, I've found the most comfort when I move my attention from what I haven't done or have to do and turn it to what God has done and is actively doing in the lives of the people we meet every day. And that's the big idea I think we need to pull from this session, that God is at work around us and we're invited to join him. We don't have to wonder if God wants to reach people or not. He does and is, and we're welcome to be part of it. And this realization allows me to approach situations in my day-to-day life with more openness and curiosity. Curiosity about people and about what God might be up to. I find myself less overwhelmed by like a vague sense of duty or guilt. And I find a healthy conviction and motivation by a sense of being invited into what God is doing. Why don't you take some time right now to talk about this idea a little bit more? In your discussion, unpack your thoughts and feelings about the themes and ideas that have come up in this first session.
Okay, so we're not going to do that just yet. That's going to be your homework this week. So was that rough for you? Was that rough for some people maybe? Having, coming to church and actually interacting with people? Glenn and I had an ongoing conversation about how we wanted to incorporate this, and we really struggled with how to incorporate, because we get into this kind of mode of coming to church and we sit and listen, or we maybe stand and sing, but definitely not sing too loud because you don't want anybody to hear you. But interaction is not near the top of our list of when we come to church, and I think that's just a very poor default that our society has grown into over the last 80 years, probably even longer. But the reality is church was meant for engagement and interaction. We were meant to come to encourage one another, strengthen one another, get to know one another, love one another. And so if you found this difficult, that's okay. That's okay. You've got 2 more weeks to get stretched and grow in some of this. If numbers drop next week, I hope not. I hope you tell someone. I hope somebody else shows up with you next week. We want you to stretch a little bit because growing requires stretching. We're not trying to scare anybody, and at the same time, we do want you to stretch a little. And so, in talking about sharing our life with the people around us, because that's what this is about, we believe that the message of why we wanted to incorporate this over the next 3 weeks, that the message of sharing your faith is critically important for each of us to consider in our lives. How are we doing that? What's that look like for each of us? And we want to grow as people who share our faith with those around us. We want to be challenged to think of new ways of what that could look like, because a lot of us, we have a very preconceived idea of what sharing faith looks like, and it's probably wrong. But for many of us who are doing that, there's alternate ways than going on a street corner with a loudspeaker. And the third thing that we thought about, a main reason of incorporating this, is because we do want to promote Alpha and give you a little taste of what Alpha is like, as we begin to kickstart Alpha again later this year, so that it's in the forefront of your mind. But I want us to briefly go back to this first question that was asked. What are the feelings and thoughts that come up for you around the idea of evangelism, or the idea of sharing your faith? A couple of years ago, I shared a stat that Alpha and Barna had done in 2021, and they had done a survey that revealed 47% of American Christians under the age of 35 say that it is wrong to share your Christian beliefs with someone of a different religion or no faith at all in hopes that they will one day identify as Christian. 47% say it's wrong to do that. But even more shocking, that's American Christians. Even more shocking, 31% of Canadian church leaders, pastors, and ministry leaders say it's wrong. 31%. Nearly half of American Christians believe it's wrong to share their faith in hopes that one day a person will know Jesus. And nearly a third of Canadian pastors and ministry leaders believe it's wrong. That's staggering to me. And if these numbers are even close to accurate, it means that there is going to be some significant angst when we talk about this idea of sharing our faith. there's going to be angst because a third of pastors and ministry leaders apparently think it's wrong. I'm not one of them, just so you know. So what does sharing your faith look like? We all have ideas, both pro and con of what that can look like. We have images in our head of what sharing your faith looks like, whether that's, a loudspeaker in some downtown city street, or whether that's going to somebody's door and handing out tracts, or maybe it's coffee with a friend. Maybe it's a drive somewhere and a conversation while you're driving. Maybe it's going to a sporting event and meaningful conversation that comes out of that, and just building relationships those ways. And I'm not saying any of these things are wrong, but I am saying that some of them may be the wrong approach for you. You have to figure out how God has wired you and live out of that. And that was a struggle that I had, growing up and as a teenager. I actively didn't want to talk about my faith. I actively avoided it because I had these images of what that looked like. It looked like preaching at somebody. It looked like telling somebody that they were going to hell. It looked at like all these things, and it's dead wrong for me. And it wasn't until in my college years where I began to grow into who I was and accept how God has created me, and just begin to live that out genuinely. And then conversations of faith began to happen all around me. John Tyson in this listed a number of fears that people have around these things. He said that we can have a fear of not having the answers, or not having the right answers I don't know fully what the Bible means when it says that, and so I'm not going to really talk to anybody about the Bible because I don't have it all figured out. But if you're waiting to have it all figured out, you're never going to talk to anybody about the Bible ever. That's just not going to happen, because even scholars who have studied the Bible for their entire lifetime still have questions about certain things. One of the other fears we have is not knowing how to communicate succinctly. We don't know how to tell them about Jesus in a way that makes sense and is simple and something they can remember. And so I don't know what to do, so I'm not going to say anything. Or we have a fear of not getting it right. What if I say something that isn't theologically accurate? I said a lot of things over my life that weren't necessarily theologically accurate. But God is not hindered by my theological accuracy. He's not. He's God. He is theologically accurate all the time, everywhere. And another fear we sometimes have is this anxiety of the outcome. How is that person going to react? What are they going to say? What are they going to think? What are they going to think of me? What if they react negatively to this? What if they don't like the fact that I said I'm a Christian, and so on and so forth, and all the fears of what that might look like. But the reality is this, is that we have to create in our lives and in our church a culture of invitation. And this means two things. The first is that we need to be a people who invite others into relationship with Jesus. Jesus is inviting others to know him, and he desires to empower you for that work as well. Scripture is full of these things. He only wants your participation in this. He calls us to make disciples. In Matthew 28, verses 18 to 20, it says, Jesus said to them, "All authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. Therefore go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, and teaching them to obey everything that I have commanded you. And surely I'm with you always to the very end of the age." Making disciples is teaching people to follow Jesus. And as followers of Jesus, this is one of the things he asks us to do. Elsewhere, we see that we are to be his ambassadors in the world. Paul writes in 2 Corinthians, "We are therefore Christ's ambassadors, as though God were making his appeal through us. We implore you, on Christ's behalf, be reconciled to God." Being an ambassador, and that idea of an ambassador, is that you are a representative of a different nation. And so as an ambassador for Jesus, you are a representative of the kingdom where you're living now. You are meant to represent him and his kingdom wherever you go. We are meant to be his witnesses. Acts 1 and 8, and we've just gone through Acts the last year and a half. But you will receive power when the Holy Spirit comes on you, and you will be my witnesses in Jerusalem and all Judea and Samaria and to the ends of the earth. And he was speaking specifically to those who were gathered there in that moment, but that command flows right through the whole church. We are to be his witnesses to the ends of the earth. And being a witness is really just about telling people what you've seen and experienced. You can't tell what you don't know. You can only tell what you do know. And then Peter takes it even a step further, that we are to be his priests. In 1 Peter 2:9, but you are a chosen people, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, God's special possession, that you may declare the praises of him who called you out of darkness and into his wonderful light. And so being a priest, that might seem incredibly overwhelming, this idea of how can I be a priest? What does that mean? Being a priest means you are an intermediary between God and man. You are meant to be the person displaying who God is to the people around you. You are meant to be the person who is reconciling those people back to God. What if the person, though, rejects that? What do we do if the people around us don't like that? Well, this is where we have to learn the second part of this. So we're to be people of invitation. But we are also, being a people of invitation means Jesus is inviting us into the work he's already doing. And so we have to learn who he is and to trust that he's already at work. He's already doing things. The story about this girl who invited her coworker to come to Alpha, I loved it. I loved that story. She had no idea what was already happening in this girl's life. God had already begun to speak to this atheist that he was present, that he cared about her. And so she's just looking for a sign, looking for something. And then this girl invites her to Alpha. God was already gone to work. And he was just inviting her into that process. And she makes this statement at the end, God pulled through. And I laugh at that, and yet I find that phrase incredibly powerful. Because what she means in saying that is that God did the work. She took a step of faith to invite her friend. Her friend took a step of faith to show up. But God was the one doing all the heavy lifting. And this is one of the things that Jesus refers to in his Gospels. It's one of my favorite verses, and it's so nuanced, and this is why I love it. Matthew 11:28-30. Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light. Being yoked to Jesus, I mean, this is a word we don't use in everyday language, being yoked to somebody. And biblically, the word yoke has two meanings. The first is that of an actual yoke that you would put on the oxen as they're plowing the fields. And it's also used symbolically for the Jewish rabbis, that when they would gather followers, it would be said that they were taking up the yoke of that rabbi, and that they were aligning themselves with him and his teachings and following him. And so what this meaning is for us is that Jesus is inviting us to follow him, to take his yoke, to be joined with him. He is going to set the pace for us. He is the one who's going to come alongside us in the work. And the reality is, if we're doing this with Jesus, who's really doing the heavy lifting? If it's me and Jesus showing up, he's doing the heavy lifting, because there's only so much I can carry. And in fact, that's exactly what he's saying in that. He said, I'm going to give you rest because my yoke is easy, because I'm going to do the work. It's my work, and it's going to be easy for you because I'm doing the lion's share of it. And you're going to keep pace with me, and I'm going to be there with you the whole time. God is the one doing the pulling. He is the one literally pulling through, setting the direction, steering us where we need to go. The second idea of the yoke in biblical terms is as a burden. This idea of the yoke of slavery is found throughout the Old Testament, which is a wearisome burden. And what Jesus is saying is that his yoke is not a yoke of slavery, it is a yoke of rest. That if you come to me and are aligned with me as you follow me, it will be easy. You don't have to be afraid or worried or full of anxiety, because my yoke is easy and my burden is light. Elijah, one of the prominent prophets in the Old Testament, maybe probably the prominent prophet in the Old Testament, he felt that feeling of a wearisome burden in his role. So he had overcome all the prophets of Baal, the fire come down from heaven, burning up the sacrifice, all of that stuff. And then he flees for his life. And he becomes so depressed, he asks God to kill him. That's the part of the story we don't always talk about. He literally wants to die because of the feeling of this wearisome burden that he has to carry alone. And God miraculously feeds him, provides for him, calls him to this mountain, and in the mountain he meets with God. And Elijah pours out his complaint, saying, I am the only one of your faithful prophets left. And in 1 Kings 19:18, this is God's response. I reserve 7,000 in Israel, all whose knees have not bowed down to Baal and whose mouths have not kissed him. And what God is reminding Elijah in this moment, you're not doing this alone, Elijah. There's 7,000 other people in Israel still faithful to me, still willing to do my work, still following after me and a heart for me. You're not in it alone. But what we see is even with this guy who was the premier prophet in the Old Testament, looked at as probably one of the greatest prophets, Elijah had become so self-focused and thought the burden was on him. He failed to realize that it was God's work and that he was merely acting on those orders. He thought it was his work. And he thought he was alone, which he wasn't. Elijah, for all of his spiritual awareness, missed that this is God's work, and he's already at work, and in ways that we don't even know or understand. In Philippians, Paul writes to us, therefore, my dear friends, as you have always obeyed, not only in my presence, but now much more in my absence, continue to work out your salvation with fear and trembling, for it is God who works in you to will and to act in order to fulfill his good purpose. And again in Philippians 1:6, being confident of this, that he who began a good work in you will carry it on to completion until the day of Christ Jesus. God is at work. He is already at work in ways that we don't even comprehend or understand yet, and he invites us to partner with him in that. And so if he's inviting us to partner and he's already doing the work, he's omnipresent, he is everywhere at all times, knows all things, and is all powerful, what anxiety do we really need to carry in that? Really? Last year, we finished our journey through the book of Acts, where we see this idea of God already being at work play out again and again. With the Ethiopian eunuch, you remember this story. So Philip is walking along the side of the road, and the Holy Spirit speaks to him, go up alongside that chariot. So he walks alongside the chariot, and lo and behold, the Ethiopian eunuch sitting in this chariot is reading from the prophet Isaiah and is reading a prophecy about Jesus. And so Philip, seizing that opportunity that God's already at work, says, do you understand what you're reading? I don't have a clue what I'm reading. And he invites Philip up with him, and Philip explains to him who Jesus is and how that has been fulfilled. And that eunuch accepts Jesus that day on the road. Then later, we see in Cornelius' household, God had already given Cornelius and his household a vision of Jesus and who he was, and this man Peter. And so he sends for Peter, and Peter goes not knowing what's happening here and shows up and realizes that God has already been dealing with his household, giving them visions, giving them dreams, giving them specific directions to come look for him. And so he preaches to them who Jesus is, and they and the entire household receive Jesus that day. God was already at work. Before Peter came on the scene, before Philip came on the scene, God was already doing something. And we don't only see this in the book of Acts. The scriptures are filled with stories of how God is going to work before anybody else shows up. One of the great examples, and Pastor Glenn a couple of weeks ago in his message mentioned Rahab. So Rahab is a prostitute, the opposite. She's a prostitute, and she's an enemy of the people of Israel. She lives in the city of Jericho. And before the spies show up, she is already being convicted by God that these are God's servants and that we're in the wrong and that I need to align myself with them. And so when the spies show up, she hides them. She says, "Spare me because I know your God is the true God. And so spare me and my family." You see, God was already at work in her house long before they even showed up in the city. God is already at work in your workplace. God is already at work in your gym. He's already at work in your book club. He's already at work in your neighborhood. He's already there. He is inviting you to join him there. But we don't always see it that way. But that's what I believe we need to do. We need to begin to see as a people of invitation that he wants us, he invites us to come in and to meet with him in this work. Jesus invites us to be with him, to know his voice, and to know his work when you see it. And that's all I have to share today. I think if we put that into practice in our lives, if we begin to ask the Holy Spirit, Lord, show me where you're at work. Help me to be aware of that. And show me what you're asking me to do in those moments. That's going to be the game changer and the life changer for us and for the people around us. And so in closing today, I want to close with an invitation to you. First, I want to close with an invitation for those of you who don't yet follow Jesus. You haven't yet said yes to him. He is inviting you to know him. He wants you to know him. Maybe he's already been at work in your life and you came to church not even 100% sure why you came this morning, but you're here. He is inviting you to know him. And so if that's you, I'm going to pray a prayer. And I want you to pray it along with me. The prayer is not the thing that's going to save you. The prayer is just acknowledging that you're turning your attention and your thoughts to him. And so I invite everybody to pray this, but especially if you know, I want to receive this Jesus into my life. I want you to pray this with me. Jesus, I've messed up my life in different ways. I haven't always followed you. But today, I want to turn my life over to you. I invite you to teach me, to help me to walk in obedience to you, to fill me with your Holy Spirit. Forgive me, Lord, of the ways that I've lived in rebellion. And teach me to walk in your ways. I receive you, Lord, as my Savior. In Jesus' name. If you have prayed that prayer for the first time and God has begun his work in your life, now you need to tell someone. That's what I've just been talking about. Tell the people around you. We want to help you grow in that. We want to help you understand what it is to follow Jesus. Now, for those of us who have been following him for years, for those of us who have been already walking with him, we're now challenged that what does it look like to live our faith out? Many of you are already doing that. Many of you are very open about your faith. But I believe God is challenging us to go even deeper. Maybe there's new ways, new people, new opportunities that he wants to bring in your path. And so for those of you who are willing to pray this prayer, I want you to stand with me. Dear Jesus, I want to follow you in full obedience. But there are parts of my life that I hold back. Help me to be sincere with my faith to those around me. Help me not to hide from the people around me. But allow me to bring you into all of my relationships. Help me to do this in a way that's meaningful and powerful. And help me to do this in a way that flows naturally out of how you've created me. Show me the opportunities where you're already at work. Show me the people that you've brought into my life so that I can share the goodness of God with them. Help me to walk in obedience to you this week. In Jesus' name, amen.